Adventure and cleaning are combined in this video, where I struggle with keypads, clean a 40-year-old jam and archive precious tapes. Oh, and a lot of music, so as always there's a no music version available. Enjoy. Hello and welcome to something that I know a lot, well I should say not a lot of people have been waiting for, the Adventures in Archiving Computer TLC crossover episode. And that thing the little bug just walked away from we will talk about today, the Commodore PET. A lovely machine, but a machine that, as I will show you, has proven to be a hassle occasionally. Mine has this plastic badge saying Commodore Professional Computer and 2001 series. Let's dive into a little badly researched history before we turn it on. The Commodore PET was released in 1977, runs on a MOS 6502 CPU and is part of the Trinity. Well, what is the Trinity, you might wonder? The Trinity comprises of 3 computers that were part of key technological developments that occurred in 1977. Some even refer to this Trinity as a holy one. The Trinity comprises of the Apple II, the Commodore PET, and the TRS-80 Model 1. The Commodore PET runs BASIC, and the main input formats are cassette tapes and floppy disks, the first being the format we will focus on in the archiving part of this video. Commodore PET, of course, is an interesting name, and PET actually stands for Personal Electronics Transactor. But when Commodore was looking to release their highly successful computer into Europe, they stumbled upon a roadblock. A roadblock in the form of this machine called
Programmentwicklungsterminal.
A product released by Philips, and it so happens to be that the first letters of that also form PET. This PET being more focused on developing software. An interesting device, but there's very little about it online. So Commodore, not being able to use the PET name in Europe, refer to it here as the CBM, Commodore Business Machines line of computers. Interestingly, newspapers still refer to it as the PET sometimes. So I will do the same. This PET I've had for a while now, and it came with this modification. 2 switches built into the case. Sort of don't mind the way it looks. One switch is a reset switch and the other switches between BASIC and the machine language monitor. For the Computer TLC part of this video, we will be focusing on the keyboard of the computer. Let's give it a quick dust. Because when I turn on the Commodore, which sometimes takes a few moments, you will find that the keyboard doesn't work. Well, here it looks like it does, but the keys I'm pressing do not correspond with the things showing up on the screen. Well, it's a very common problem on the PET for the keyboard not to work, and we will have to do some troubleshooting. I think we are dealing here with either an IC problem or problem with the conductive pads. So let's open the case, which is almost like working on a car, and start working on this PET. But first, let's take a couple seconds to take it all in. Yes, what a lovely motherboard. I'm starting with something really trivial, and that is by resocketing the 620 IC, the peripheral interface adapter. This chip plays a big part in how the keyboard functions, mainly by scanning the keyboard matrix and sending the appropriate key press data to the CPU. Also sprayed the socket with contact cleaner, of course. Did the same with the keyboard cable, but sadly no results. These steps maybe seem a bit stupid, but I have found that on some systems, a simple thing like some contact cleaner can really bring something back to life. So let's get the keyboard out of the case and take a closer look. It's held in by a lot of screws, but comes out nicely. For this project, a video by the 8-bit guy was very helpful, so I'll be trying his troubleshooting steps. Starting by connecting something to the keyboard connector on the motherboard. These pins are separated out in input pins and output pins. When doing this, random characters appear on the screen. This could be an indication that the IC part of the computer functions. The next test I tried was by connecting my multimeter to the keyboard and in continuity mode look for connections, but no connections were found. By the way, this is not the best table for this kind of work, as by laying the alligator clips on the table, you get a connection. Let's take a quick look at how the keyboard sort of works and what might be the issue we are facing here, because as you will see in a moment, the inside of the keyboard looks like this, Well, this is the PCB, and it has these pads on it. And when you press down a key that with my Hollywood grade CGI I'm trying to duplicate here, you create a bridge that sends a signal to the decoder chip. This bridge is created by a small pad. Fast forward plus minus 44 years or so of use, and you will find that the pads will lose their ability to bridge the contacts and send the signal to the decoder chip. But that is just my amateur brain trying to understand it. To fix this, there are various products out there, the most popular being Code, but that I couldn't find. So I resorted to this product with the tantalizing name Keypad Fix. Let's remove the back of the keyboard, which is quite the undertaking because it feels like the back is held in by like 50 screws. The Keypad Fix comes in a sort of underwhelming packaging. It's very small. Let's see what's inside. Okay, interesting. So reading the manual, you will have to stir together the two halves in this little container. I started doing that with this added Q-tip. I moved to a stick for better results. It sort of seems like the two didn't really want to mix together, but after a couple minutes it sort of did, and became a slightly lumpy black substance that I started painting on the pads of the keyboard. A Q-tip proved to be not the best thing for this, so I moved to a paintbrush, which allowed me to apply it a little bit more properly. I read that it was advised to not apply too thick of a layer, so I tried to not overdo it. And we all know how exciting it is to see paint dry, especially conductive paint. Also, I cleaned the PCB with some alcohol so that it looked very clean. Just to be sure, I wanted to test the connection between the keyboard and the connector. Which seemed fine. Since I was working on it, I felt it would be a good moment to start cleaning the keyboard, as it was still a bit dusty, so I removed the keycaps and vacuumed the plastics. And gave it a scrub. Before cleaning the keycaps, I tried a continuity test on the PCB. Then with a cleaning cloth I started cleaning the keycaps, which on this keyboard are really nice. I reinstalled the spacebar, which I always find daunting as I had some bad experiences with reinstalling spacebars. Bad experiences implying I broke some. Then it was time to start putting back the keys, which is always satisfying. This is how the pads turned out. I felt that some of them were not covered properly, so I went over those again to make sure they were all covered properly. By the way, all the other work I just did on the keyboard happened in such a way keeping the painted pads safe, but that's enough keyboard for now. Let's move on to the archiving part of this crossover episode. This box arrived a very long time ago, on the 24th of December in 2023 to be precise. Inside the little box we find one of my favorite formats, the cassette tape. These cassette tapes of course being related to the Commodore PET. There are 9 of them, so it's not an enormous batch. I haven't seen too much Commodore PET related tapes on my main hunting around the Dutch version of eBay. My own theory for this is that since cassette tapes are so easy to override, for instance by putting music or other computer programs from newer machines like the VIC-20 on it, that most tapes ended up being recycled a long time ago. I'm impressed the seller remembered that these were for the Commodore PET, as there are no marks on it at all. Interestingly, there's also a tape in the batch that originally had Atari programs on it. That maybe takes down the theory I just shared. This being mostly tapes designed for computers means that the tape lengths are very short. I also got these books in at the same time, one being Compute's first book of PET CBM. I really like the way they designed the layout of this book. The other being this book, which now that I think of it, also has a lovely layout. This is Programming the PET CBM by Rachel West. Since we are experiencing some technical difficulties with my first Commodore PET, it is time to enter in the second Commodore PET in my collection. Say hello to my little friend. In a video some time ago I showed how I got this computer from a town very far from the one that I live in, and boy was it worth the travel, as it came with an interesting daughterboard. Never expected I would find another PET without breaking the bank. I forgot to mention in the initial video that the computer was hiding in a listing focused on calculators. On the back it says CBM 3000, and that brings me to a question that I sort of had. It runs BIOSIC? BIOSC. So this is the Commodore CBM 3000, released in 1978. Oh well, that's the date it was introduced into Europe. Also runs on a MOS 6502 CPU, 32K RAM just like my other PET, and this one comes with an expansion board. And that is what sparks my question. What model of PET is this? When we look at the Wikipedia table showing the various models, of course the logical thing to do would be to look at the part about the PET 2001. Also of course because that is literally on the badge. But someone told me that maybe we were looking at a Super PET. So I did some looking around and found some pictures of the Super PET's insides, both of them having two expansion boards with different connectors. But I get where the person telling me this got it from, because they sort of look similar. I did find a picture of the expansion board on the internet. You can see the similarities. And when I took a closer look at it, I found that it had some text on it. Text that on mine was probably covered in dust. The dust needs some addressing, but not in this video. When we flip over the board, we see DD-DSK CTL. Well, you don't need to be Sherlock Holmes to figure out that that has something to do with disk drives. And I remember the old sir who sold it to me telling me that the cable hanging out of the computer connected to the board probably went to a disk drive. This board made me go down a rabbit hole that I want to explore further, an exploration I'll probably share on my channel. But for now, back to the archiving and TLC work. So this is also a lovely example, but one that needs a bit of a scrub. So I went to work, taking into account that cleaning this computer is probably not like most other computers I'm used to. So I'm trying to stay away from most chemicals and abrasive things. Glass cleaners seem to do a really good job on most parts of the computer, but some of the dirt appeared to be the kind that would not really come off. Also I tried to not get any liquids in the case. The top was particularly grimy. For the sides and sort of finishing touch I used a magic eraser. And I know I said I would stay away from abrasive things, and the magic eraser is quite the abrasive cleaning solution, but I didn't apply too much force and cleaned it up with some glass cleaner after. This N I thought was cut out from the case, but turned out to be a sort of sticker. The computer cleaned up nicely, but by looking at my water I could tell I had taken away a slight layer of paint, but I'm happy with the results. So now we have a computer that is able to load tapes. We can start with the archiving. Something that I actually already did quite some time ago, fearing that the precious data on the tapes might fade over time. For the archiving I use this trusty dataset of mine. I have a lot of these as they are very common, but most of them tend to have some issues rendering them a bit unreliable for archiving. And it has this weird switch on it. To connect the dataset to my computer I will be using this 1530 USB that I got from eBay. I think these are still available and it's a very nifty device. So the connecting sort of goes like this, of course. Sort of feels like I'm doing the safety instructions on an aircraft. The device is very simple to use in Audacity, other audio programs available of course. You just select it as your input and make sure that things are set to mono. Then you press record and play on your dataset. Interestingly, OBS also recorded the computer audio from the dataset, that I turned down the volume of a lot to not hurt your ears. The way the waveform looks here is how it is supposed to look. If the audio doesn't reach the edges, you need to tweak your settings. After the recording is finished, you cut away the silent parts and export the file to WAV format. This was tape 2, so I save it as tape 2 PET. Then to move on, it is time to download another very nice piece of software called AudioTap. This is a very simple program. You select Create Tab File and then make sure as input file you select the right tape. Create an output file and run the program, which is really fast, certainly for a tape this short. Then to test your program, you move to Device Emulator, something I certainly did when my Commodore PET was not functioning, and see if it wants to load. And this is where I ran into some issues, because the tapes didn't want to load. Attaching a dataset image is very simple, but the first try didn't load. So I went back to AudioTap and started to tweak some of the settings. Well, one, a setting that was hidden under Advanced Options, as the machine is listed as being the Commodore 64. This needs to be changed to the VIC-20. Doing this, I again followed the same steps, loading a file and setting an output file, and heading over to Device Emulator, again attaching the image, which interestingly still says C64 tape, and trying to load it. I always make the mistake of typing C load. Press play on tape. That you do by going to this menu. And it's searching. Let me put you on hold while we load. But sadly, after loading the whole tape, nothing happened. Me feeling sad because of it probably being a degraded tape made me want to try one more thing, the inverted waveform option. So again, I followed all the same steps, which now we can all dream, and pressed play on the digitally emulated player. Well, lo and behold, it found a program. It always surprises myself how exciting I find it when a piece of software I'm trying to digitize shows up on the screen. So now that I have a workflow down for the Commodore PET, it is time to start archiving the other tapes. Also, now that I have this dataset out, I want to find out what this mod is for. Let's do some investigating. The switch has two labels next to it, with very faded text on it. Maybe we can see what it used to say. I thought that maybe shining a UV light on it would show some of the faded text, but that turned out not to be the case. So if the labels are not going to give this away, then we will need to open the case. Not that by just looking at the circuit will make me know what it does, but I just wanted to see if the switch is actually connected to something. Opening is quite straightforward, and yes, the switch is actually connected to some of the parts, judging by the solder traces to the ICs of the board. I was in a bit of a hurry to do this and didn't manage to flip over the board. I think looking around on the web that this switch probably allowed someone to fast load programs on their Commodore 64. Back to the keyboard, as the conductive paint has dried and I put it back together. Let's test it. I really hope this will work, as it would be so nice to get this computer back to working order. So let's plug it in, turn it on and try the keyboard. Well, let's insert a wop wop, as this didn't work. I really don't get it. Another inspection of the pads and board followed. Not really obvious to me what I did wrong. Maybe the keypad fix is not compatible with this type of a fix. Anyways, I decided to order the Kai code to see if that would maybe work, but that is on back order, so will probably take some time to get here. But still, since the issue is really a bit strange and some of the keys seem to work and the issue seems to stay the same, I wonder if it's an IC issue. So I looked at the two chips and decided to order some replacements for the 6520 and the decoder chip. Of course, not before looking around my spare parts bin, which I now have an Excel sheet for. So fast forward a couple days and the first chips have shown up at my doorstep, being the decoder chip. So it's time to get out the desoldering iron. Soldering purists, please run away. Attention, attention. Warning, bad soldering ahead. To be honest, I'm always a bit reluctant to work on this precious of equipment, but if I take my time, most of the time things go well. Interesting to see what patches they made while doing the modifications. I started by adding some solder to the existing traces to give the desoldering gun a little bit more to grip onto. It went quite well, and with some hot air, which some people might consider cheating, the chip lifted out. Then I soldered in a socket, allowing to put back the old chip, or the new ones. Not bad and not good, I would say. So I tested the system with the old chip in the socket to see if it still had the same problem, which it did. Which in this case, sort of is a good thing. So now let's try the new chips. Well, one of them. These are common and cheap, so I thought it would be good to have 3 more for maybe other projects. Putting it back in, the board doesn't flex at all. Also, this didn't fix the issue. Heck, I got so desperate I even tried the Commodore 64 keyboard. Well, still no progress made. Let's move back to the Commodore PET that works and start with testing some of the tab files I created using the 1530 to USB. For that I will be using a device I have showed before and that I actually really like, just because it's sort of quirky. This is the Tapeweeno Mini. It plugs into the tape port and is operated by these 4 switches that when using the device with the PET is sort of a downside as they are a bit hard to access. The switches have the following labels: Next, Previous, Abort and Select. Pretty straightforward. Connected to the Tapeweeno is this LCD screen, which allows you to operate the Tapeweeno. When you turn on the PET, the Tapeweeno also turns on automatically and boots up. I added my PET tapes to a special folder, which you can navigate to using the switches. So let's try some of them and see what's on them. Of course by typing load and selecting the tape file on the Tapeweeno. Ah, great, the first file is found. This says address file in Dutch. Good, loading. When I run, the program asks a question, which I of course answered using all of my brainpower and without cheating. Moving on, there were some issues trying to load the next programs. I never really found out how to load the sort of unnamed programs that appear by it just saying found. Probably will have to look at the manual to figure that out. This next program allows you to enter names and then randomize them in a cute pet way. Probably very handy for school applications. Listing it shows that it's not even the longest of programs. More programs popping up, some of them in Dutch. This is a game of tic-tac-toe. I had to look up the English name for this and found myself playing it on Google for a couple minutes in pure distraction. This was one of those you cannot win, I think. Oh well, I couldn't. Random numbers being generated. I won't bother you with all the programs, but there is a bunch of fun little programs. For fun, I also tried loading a program just by connecting the dataset to the computer, which took some fiddling and contact cleaner. Sort of looks like I'm war dialing. The keyboard on this pad also needs some persuading sometimes. But let's not forget, this is a piece of IT history. Also, this computer appears to use different switches from the ones on my other pad. I think this is the professional keyboard, since it doesn't have the graphics characters on it. Moving back to the keyboard of my other pad for another quick update. The Kai code showed up and I applied it, following the instructions to the pads. This looks much better than the keypad fix stuff, but I believe it's the same principle. After a day or two of letting it cure, installing it into the pad and testing it. And testing it shows that we still have the same issue. Not really getting why this didn't work. I'm still suspecting this might lie with the computer, as testing a working pad on the PCB also didn't work. So could this maybe be a RAM issue? I can imagine you're thinking, why not just swap over your other PET keyboard to this one? Well, the add-on board is obstructing my access to it, and I want to try to carefully remove it, as it almost looks like it's soldered onto the computer. But that is for another video. A video that will talk about the add-on board, but also about some of the ROM chips in my PET, as there might be some interesting programs hidden in those. Then we can also try some keyboard swapping, and also take the time to remove all the dead spiders from the second PET. So for now I'm screwing back in my keyboard and nominate the fixing part of this video as a failure. But the road towards my failure was fun, since what you have seen happen over the past minutes is a process that started I think in January of this year. I'm really happy with my two PETs. Working or not, they are pieces of art to be treasured. Those tapes we archived are of course available for download over on my website, and I invite you to play around with them. On the same page you will find the Computes book that I also archived. The book by Mr. West I still have to get to. Lovely to see them next to each other. Feels like a little computer lab. Although my first one is a bit of a patient. Okay, well, I believe that this might be the longest video on the channel yet. The PET has proven to be a topic that a lot could be said about. I don't expect there to be a lot of people sticking around till this moment, but if you did, thank you very much for watching. Much appreciated. See you next time. Bye.